Welcome to NightWard Echo. Tonight, we descend into 5 creepiest encounters in a graveyard beyond the graves where stone markers stand still. But something behind them, DOESN, single quotes to almost 90% of you listen, and disappear without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the darkness. Subscribe now, kill the lights, silence the world, and let's begin. My name's Derek Salinas. I'm from Lockefort, out by the vineyards, and I work as a maintenance tech. I'm sorry if my voice shakes. I haven't slept right since that week. I'm trying to talk slow, but when I remember certain parts, I stop breathing and then everything comes out too fast. Man, just stay with me. I swear to God, I'm telling you what happened. It started normal. Really normal. I had oatmeal at 6:10 because the microwave in the duplex keeps running 3 seconds past 0 and it bothers me. I put on the gray shirt with the stitched name patch because the blue one still smelled like degreasa. I clocked in at 7:03 at the small distribution center off the frontage road. The place with the long loading dock and the humming lights that buzz louder when the valley smog is heavy. It was one shift. That's all it was supposed to be. One shift. The air was thick that morning, kind of a heat shimmer, even though it wasn't hot yet. I was alone for the first 2 hours because the other tech was out sick. I liked it that way. No one around. Just the carts, the conveyors, the humming lights. Those lights never shut up. They have a rhythm. A soft drone you stop noticing unless something interrupts it. And something interrupted it, but not at first. First, it was just work. Fix a junction box. Replace a belt. Log a temperature reading in the refrigerated row. Wipe my hands. Drink water. I remember checking my phone at 9:26 and thinking the day was dragging. Completely normal. The wrongness started with a moment so small, I almost forgot it. I was in the back near Bay 12, the one they hardly use, and I heard someone say, "Hey, can you check this real quick?" I answered without looking up. Just a quick, "Yeah, hold on," because that's what I always say. I thought it was one of the forklift guys, but no one was there when I turned. I didn't jump or anything. People walk around. Sound bounces weird. You get echoes. That building is metal and concrete. I told myself it was normal. I didn't think about it again until much later. I kept working. A cart rolled a few inches when I wasn't watching. I figured the floor wasn't level. A wrench wasn't where I put it. I blamed myself. A clipboard on the desk turned a little. Not much, just enough to notice. I thought maybe the vibration from the AC unit nudged it. Small things, man. Small things I explained away because that's what you do on a shift when you don't want extra work. It was around 11:40, I think. The sun outside should have been bright, but through the high windows it looked dull. Like the day stalled halfway between morning and noon. I was under one of the motors when I noticed the humming lights had changed pitch. Not off, not broken, just wrong. A little too slow, a little too heavy. That's when I felt it. The certainty. I wasn't alone, not the normal kind. Not the coworker walked in kind. It felt like something stood just outside my sightline. Not a figure, not a shadow, a presence. Like the room had one more person in it than air allowed. I tried to talk myself out of it. Drink water. Adjust my gloves. Keep working, but the wrongness kept stacking. The forklift's charging station was on when I hadn't turned it on. A toolbox drawer was slightly open, even though I always shut them hard so they latch. My radio crackled, even though no one else was on my channel. It was small things, but they added up. I kept repeating, "It's nothing, man, it's nothing." Trying to slow my breathing, around 12:17, I went to check Bay 12 again. I don't know why. My legs carried me there like I had to confirm something. The place felt still. The kind of still where air stops moving. The first detail that didn't fit was the light over the bay. It was off. I didn't turn it off. I hadn't touched that switch all day. I stepped in and the air felt cooler even though the AC didn't. Reached that far. Then something happened that made my chest tighten. So hard I thought I'd pass out by my name. Patched the stitched one on my shirt pulled slightly downward. Not like someone grabbed it. Just a subtle tug, like gravity tilted wrong for a second. I froze. My hands shook. I whispered to myself, no, no, not now. Because I didn't know what else to say. I turned around quick. Nothing, no one. Just the quiet bay and the light that refused to turn on even when I flipped the switch 3 times. The hum from the other lights seemed distant, muffled. Like the sound knew not to enter that space. Then the radio clicked again. Just a soft click. A breath, not a word. A breath. That's when the shift broke open. I backed out of Bay 12. The hallway in front of me wasn't the hallway I walked through 100 times. The layout was the same, but the distance was wrong. The far wall looked farther away, stretched by a few feet. The lights were a little dimmer. The exit sign looked like it leaned, even though it wasn't physically leaning. I blinked hard. Looked again. It was normal, then wrong, then normal. My eyes couldn't decide. Something inside me said, don't step forward. Not a voice. Just that deep instinct you trust more than your thoughts. But I had to get back to the main floor. I took 1 step, then another. The hallway felt thick, like walking through warm air, even though the valley smog wasn't that heavy inside. My jacket brushed my arm, even though I wasn't wearing one. My own memory didn't line up for a second, and I, too, swallow hard to stay calm. When I got back to the main floor, everything looked normal again. People were on break. Machines were running. A forklift beeped somewhere. I almost convinced myself I imagined the whole thing. Then, saw my wrench. It was on the far conveyor. That conveyor was on the opposite side of the building from where I left it. No one touches my tools. Everyone knows that. And the way it sat centered perfectly, handle pointing at me, made my stomach twist. Someone would have had to carry it there. I looked around. No one even looked my way. I heard the forklift guy shout, "You good, man?" But his voice didn't feel like it reached me. It was like he was in another room. I picked up the wrench and the metal felt warm. Warmer than my hand. Like it had been held. I couldn't breathe right after that. The lights flickered once. Just once. But I swear the flicker lasted too long. Long enough for me to feel something standing close behind me. Close enough that my skin tightened like I stepped into cold water. I didn't turn. I couldn't. I walked straight to the break room and washed my face until the water ran warm. The rest of the shift didn't fix anything. I kept losing minutes. 5 minutes. Then 10. I'd look at the clock and whole chunks of time were missing. I'd be fixing a panel and then I'd be standing by the loading door with no memory of crossing the floor. My feet hurt like I'd been running. My shirt clung to my back. People asked if I felt sick. I said I was fine. I wasn't fine. The climax, if that's what you want to call it, happened at 4:02 p.m. I was closing out a work order when every light in the building dimmed at the same time. Not off, just down. Like someone slowly turned a knob. And in that dimness, I saw movement. Not a figure. Not a shape. Just movement in the reflection of the stainless panel. Behind me, too close. I turned fast and everything was normal. But the panel stayed, showing movement for 1 second longer than it should have. Like a leftover image. A delayed reflection. I dropped my clipboard. The sound echoed wrong. Too sharp. I walked out. I didn't clock out. I didn't talk to anyone. I walked to my truck and drove home with the radio off because I was afraid it would breathe again. I don't work that shift anymore. I told them it messed with my sleep. They didn't argue. They moved me to daytime, but the building feels different to me now. I won't go near Bay 12. I won't even look down that hallway. I still lose time sometimes. Small bits, seconds, maybe a minute. I'll put a tool down and find it across the room. Doors I close end up cracked open. Rooms feel occupied the second I leave them. I wake up at night thinking someone whispered my name differently than how I say it. I don't think it stayed at the building. I think something from that shift followed me home, and I don't know how to make it stop. I used to take the early shift at the supply yard out near Madera. It wasn't a big place, just a fenced-in lot with stacks of pipe, pallets of insulation, bundles of conduit, and a prefab office that always smelled like coffee that had been left warming too long. Most mornings felt the same. The sun trying to push through valley haze, trucks idling. My boots still stiff from the day before. I got in at 5:58 almost. Every day because the supervisor wanted the gate open exactly at 6 o'clock, so the contractors could roll through without waiting. Routine kept everything simple. That morning felt simple too. I had a thermos full of weak coffee and a granola bar I ate while walking across the gravel. Everything looked as it usually did. The forklift was parked where I left it. The long shadows from the storage racks stretched across the lot the same way they always did before sunrise. Nothing felt different. I remember thinking about the rest of the week and whether we'd finally get the reorganizing done. There was nothing unusual. No sign of anything wrong. I clocked in, put my thermos on the counter, and turned on the yard lights. They flickered the way they always did. I signed off on a delivery that came the night before, checked the inventory numbers, and headed back out with the keyring to unlock the side gate. Normal steps. Normal quiet. Normal morning air that smelled faintly like dust and metal. But I remember something strange even then. I didn't recognize the sound of my own footsteps on the gravel. They felt sharper, closer, as if the ground carried the sound differently. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured maybe the cooler air was affecting how sound carried. It happens sometimes. I had finished unlocking the gate and was turning back when I heard it behind me. Another set of steps. Not heavy, not fast, just steady. Gravel shifting in a rhythm that didn't match mine. I stopped walking. The sound stopped. I remember standing perfectly still, waiting, listening. There was nothing. Not wind, not a truck, not a person. Just the early morning quiet. I told myself I was tired, or that maybe a stray dog had wandered in. We got that sometimes from the fields. I walked again. 3 steps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. And then there it was again behind me. 3 faint steps. A fraction of a second delayed. Like something was pacing with me, but trying not to be obvious about it. I turned around fast. Nothing. Just the rows of pipe and conduit catching the first bit of orange light from the horizon. No movement. No dog. No person. The gate was closed. The lot was empty except for me. I shook it off and kept walking, but I felt something then. Not fear exactly, just a pull of attention. Like the air behind me had weight. I walked a little faster. The steps behind me kept the same speed, still faint. Still just at that distance where you can't tell if they're real or imagined. When I reached the office, I went inside, closed the door harder than I needed to, and took a long drink from my thermos. I looked out the little window toward the storage racks. Everything was still. I kept telling myself it was in my head. Sounds bounce around in that yard. Trucks from the highway echo weird sometimes. It was nothing. At 6:22, the second employee arrived. His name was Mark, and he always parked crooked. He walked into the office, stretched, and said, "Man feels quiet out there today." I remember that exact line because it stuck with me. I asked him what he meant by quiet, and he just shrugged and said it felt like the place was still sleeping. I laughed it off, but something about it made me uneasy again. Customers started coming in. We loaded materials. We checked off orders. Normal day. Nothing strange. But every time I walked out alone to grab something from the far racks, I kept hearing something. Sometimes it was a soft shift in the gravel behind me. Other times it was the faintest rustle, like someone brushing against stacked cardboard. I would turn quickly every time. Nothing, just sunlight, dust, and the deep. Steady hum of the yard lights. Around 10 o'clock, I needed to grab some large junction boxes from the far corner. It was the quietest part of the yard because the containers blocked the highway noise. When I walked back there, the air felt heavier. Not hotter, just thick. I heard the gravel again. A few small steps. I turned, expecting maybe Mark had followed me, but I didn't see him. I didn't see anyone. Just the rows of materials and that weird shimmer of heat rising off the metal, even though the air wasn't that warm yet. I started walking faster. The echo behind me grew more distinct. Still at that same distance, never closing in. Just following, matching me. I felt a tremor in my hands. My breathing got uneven. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, but the sound had weight to it. Like something with real mass was walking back there. When I reached the forklift, the keys weren't where I left them. I always put them on the hook by the wheel. Always, but they were missing. I searched around the seat. Checked my pockets. Nothing. I started getting frustrated, thinking maybe someone moved them without telling me. I walked back toward the office to ask Mark about it. Halfway there, I heard the footsteps again, but this time, they were faster, still matching my pace, but more insistent, more confident. Gravel shifting in a steady rhythm I recognized as not natural, not animal, not something random. I stopped. They stopped. I could feel something in the air behind me. Not wind, not presence. Just a pressure that didn't belong. I told myself not to turn around. If I turned around every time I heard something, I'd just freak myself out more. So I kept walking. The steps followed. And then, halfway to the office, the yard lights flickered. They never flickered during the day, only when they were warming up at sunrise. But they flickered then, just for a moment, and the shadow of the storage racks shifted in a way that made my chest tighten. I reached the office door and pulled it open fast. Inside, Mark was sorting receipts. I asked him if he had moved the forklift keys. He shook his head. I asked him if he had walked back near the junction boxes. He said no, he had been inside for the last 20 minutes. I remember just nodding and trying to steady my breathing. I didn't tell him anything. I didn't want him to think I was overworked, or losing focus, or anything like that. I needed this job. I needed the routine. Around noon, we both went out to load a large order. As we walked across the lot, the air felt still again. But this time, I wasn't alone. Mark was right beside me. And even then, I felt something watching. Something keeping pace. But there were no steps this time. Only silence. A silence that was somehow worse. We finished the load and headed back. When we were halfway across the yard, Mark slowed down. He looked behind us and frowned. I asked him what he was doing, and he said, "Thought I heard something," but he didn't explain what. He just kept looking at the ground like he expected to see tracks. When we got back to the office, my thermos wasn't where I left it. I never moved that thermos. It was sitting on the opposite counter, lid off, still half full. I asked Mark if he moved it. He said he hadn't touched it. My hands were shaking then. Not badly, but enough that I had to grip the edge of the counter to steady myself. I told myself I needed to reset. Just step outside, get some air, clear my head. I walked out the front door and stood near the gate. The yard felt too quiet. The sun was high. The shadows were short. There was no reason for anything to feel off. But I felt watched, stronger than before. Like something was standing just out of view, holding still, waiting for me to move. When I walked across the gravel, I heard it again. Very soft, very slow, each step following mine exactly. I stopped mid-stride, and the sound stopped mid-stride. I took a single step forward. A single step followed. Perfect timing. Perfect distance. My chest tightened so hard, I had to brace myself on the rack beside me. I turned quickly. Nothing. But I swear the shadows looked different. As if something had moved a half second before I turned. Like the shape of the rack had been taller for one moment and then snapped back to normal. I backed away toward the office. Keeping my eyes on the racks. The air felt wrong, heavy, watching, listening. I stepped on a piece of loose blocks gravel and the sound echoed sharper than it should have. Behind me, another piece of gravel shifted even though nothing was there. I ran inside, closed the door, locked it. I stood there breathing hard, trying to calm down. Mark looked at me and said, "You all right?" I nodded too quickly. He kept watching me like he wasn't sure. The rest of the day felt stretched. Every trip into the yard was slow, careful, controlled. I kept looking over my shoulder even when I tried not to. The light felt off. The air felt off. And every time I walked more than a few feet alone, I heard it again. Just those soft steps. Same distance, same timing. Never faster, never closer. Just enough to tell me it was still there. When the shift ended at 3:30, I left the yard quickly. I didn't even stay to finish organizing the conduit. I clocked out, walked to my car, and felt the pressure behind me the whole way. Not footsteps this time. Just a stillness that felt like something had followed me to the gate but couldn't step past it. I got in my car, turned the key, and drove. I didn't look in the rearview mirror until I hit the main road. When I did, I saw the yard, quiet, empty, still, but I swear the shadows near. The back racks were longer than they should have been for that time of day. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time the house creaked, I woke up. I kept thinking about the steps. The timing, the way it matched me. I told myself I had imagined it, but deep down, it felt real. The next morning, I drove to work early. When I got to the yard, the side gate was already unlatched. I never left it unlatched. I checked it 3 times a night before. I walked inside slowly. The gravel felt louder under my boots. The silence felt heavier. At the forklift, the keys were back on the hook. Exactly where they should have been. I stood there for a full minute, staring at them. I didn't move. Didn't T touch anything? I felt something near the far racks. Not movement. Just pressure. Like the air was bending a little. I walked backwards toward the office and the gravel shifted behind me once. Just once, enough to tell me it was still there. I didn't stay for the shift. I told the supervisor I needed a different assignment. Something indoor. Something not in the yard. I didn't explain why. I just said the open space was getting to me. I haven't gone back since. And even now, when I walk on gravel anywhere, I listen for that second set of steps. Sometimes I hear nothing. Sometimes I hear 1 or 2 soft shifts that might be wind. But once in a while, late in the day when the light feels thin, I hear that quiet crunch again. Always just far enough behind me. Always waiting for me to take the next step. I don't work that shift anymore. Carlos Vega had always kept his life simple. Work the morning shift at the maintenance depot. Fix whatever needed fixing. Clock out at 3. Pick up groceries at the strip mall off Jensen Avenue. Go home, heat up leftovers, maybe fall asleep watching football reruns. Nothing strange. Nothing unusual. Nothing worth remembering much at all. He lived outside of Fresno, on the edge of one of those neighborhoods where the corners all looked the same and the street lamps buzzed louder than the cars that passed under them. He liked it that way, predictable, quiet. Some of his friends joked that he could walk the same block blindfolded and never hit a curb. The only place that ever felt a bit off was Rosewood Cemetery, a small, older graveyard set behind a chain-link fence and a faded sign. Carlos didn't have any reason to go there normally, except for his job at the depot. The groundskeeper had retired, and until they hired someone new, maintenance workers rotated weekly responsibilities, trash pickup, light checks, gate repairs. Boring, routine stuff, usually done by lunch. That week, it was Carlos's turn. He got the assignment Monday morning, right around 7:45, just after clocking in. His supervisor handed him a clipboard. Nothing big. Just walk the perimeter, check the sprinklers, tighten some loose fixtures on the path lights. Should take you an hour. Maybe less, she said. He nodded. Got it. The morning was cool, a bit of valley smog hovering low, not quite thick enough to bother him. He drove the service truck down the short road leading to the cemetery, parked near the front gate, and got to work. Everything looked normal: dry grass in some patches, neat rows of markers, tall oak trees casting shade over half the grounds. A couple of the path lights flickered when the wind pushed the branches, but he already expected that. Most of the fixtures were decades old. He walked along the cracked concrete path with a small toolbox, checking bolts, twisting wires, listening to the hum of circuits. Ordinary sounds, steady, predictable. He didn't notice anything unusual until around 8:30. On the far side of the grounds, where the older graves were marked by tall, thin headstones, he bent down to tighten one of the lamp screws, wiped his hands on his jeans, and stood again. That's when he saw it. A long shadow stretched across the grass. Sharp-edged, dark, angled exactly as if someone tall was standing behind him. The kind of shadow that came from a person blocking the morning sun. But Carlos was alone. He turned quickly, expecting maybe a jogger or someone walking a dog by the fence. Nothing. The path behind him was empty. The grass was still. The trees didn't move. He looked down again. The shadow was still there. It wasn't his. His own shadow fell forward, toward the path. This one fell sideways, crossing the graves. He blinked a few times to be sure. Then he stepped to the left. His shadow moved. The other one didn't. He checked the light source. The sun was behind him, low but bright. Nothing else nearby was tall enough or shaped right to cast what he was seeing. No poles, no statues, no branches angled like that. He stepped forward. His shadow shortened. The other shadow stretched, like it was sliding away from him instead of responding to the sunlight. Carlos rubbed the back of his neck. Must be a trick of the light, he muttered. Valley haze sometimes played strange games with brightness. Heat, shimmer, smog, distortion. He'd seen weird reflections on long drives. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He walked to the edge of the shadow and knelt. The grass under it looked normal. No temperature change. No shape carved into the ground. Nothing physical causing it. When he stood again, the shadow angled slightly. As though it had shifted direction, he turned around once more. Nobody. Not even the wind. For several seconds, he just stood there, waiting for it to fade, to break apart, to align with some object he hadn't noticed. But it held steady, longer than seemed possible, sharper than any shadow formed in early morning haze. Eventually, he told himself it was probably an issue with his eyes. Maybe he'd stood too quickly. Maybe brightness contrast was confusing him. It happened to people all the time. He took a slow breath and tried to go back to work, and for the next half hour, everything seemed fine, until he reached the old tool shed near the back fence. A small structure, paint peeling, used for storing sprinkler parts and spare bulbs. It always looked dim inside, even with the door open as he walked toward it. He felt a tug of unease, again not fear, just discomfort. Like stepping into a room you forgot you rearranged. He pushed open the door and switched on the overhead lamp. The interior lit up weakly. Dusty shelves. Rusted tools. A coiled hose. Nothing strange. He found the replacement bulb he needed and stepped back toward the path and noticed the shadow again. Not in the same place as before. Not at the same angle. Now it lay across the shed door, leaning, stretched, tall. No one was nearby. The sun hadn't moved much. The trees around him were still. But the shadow had repositioned itself with complete disregard for all of that. Carlos felt a chill. He couldn't explain. He backed up slowly until his own shadow met the shed's wall. The strange shadow remained separate, independent. He checked the ground, then the sky, then the empty fence line. His breath hitched, not fear, just confusion edging into unease. He'd never seen anything like it. He pulled out his work phone and snapped a picture just to reassure himself it was there. The camera screen showed the shed, the door, the ground, that the shadow wasn't in the photo. He lowered the phone. The shadow was still on the shed. He raised the phone again. Gone. He lowered it. Visible. His hands tightened around the case. He wasn't imagining it. There was something there, some optical effect, or light distortion that only existed outside digital capture. He didn't want to jump to conclusions. Not without understanding. He backed further away until the shadow seemed to shrink. Though not in the way a normal shadow shrank. It contracted unevenly, as if folding inward toward a single line before settling again. He checked his watch. 9:18. He had been at the cemetery nearly 2 hours. He'd never taken this long before, unsure of what else to do. He returned to the path lights. Work helped steady his breathing. Tasks were simple, clear, familiar. But even as he focused on tightening screws and adjusting wiring, he felt a subtle pressure at the back of his neck, as if something might be nearby, watching, not threatening. Just watching with impossible stillness. By the time he reached the last row, he thought maybe the worst had passed. Maybe the strangeness would dissolve as the morning warmed. He stayed calm, methodical, steady, and then, near the front gate, he saw the shadow again, farther ahead this time. Stretched across the walkway, like someone tall had just walked behind the sign. Except the sign couldn't cast a shape like that. It was too short, too broad. Too uneven. Carlos took a single step forward. The shadow shifted slightly, not fading, just adjusting. As though responding to his movement, he stopped. The shadow stopped. He stepped backward. The shadow elongated. Trailing toward the graves, he closed his eyes briefly, steadying his thoughts. When he opened them, the shadow was still waiting. Angled now toward the main path he'd need to take to reach the truck. He had two choices: walk past it, or take the longer way around the fence perimeter. He chose the perimeter as he walked. Avoiding the path where the shadow lingered, he kept his eyes on the ground. He didn't look back until he reached the truck door. When he finally turned for a last glance, the shadow was nowhere to be seen. The path was ordinary again. The sun lay across the graves in even, familiar lines. Carlos got in the truck and drove away without finishing the checklist. He'd explain later that the lights were fine, the shed was stocked, and the perimeter looked good. No one usually double-checked cemetery assignments. For the rest of the week, he avoided driving near Rosewood. He took different routes home. He didn't look at long shadows on sidewalks or tall tree silhouettes in parking lots. When the next rotation came, and another worker was assigned to the grounds, Carlos didn't say anything about what he'd seen. He didn't want to worry anyone. He didn't want to sound strange, but every now and then, in the quiet moments at the depot or in the evenings when the sun set at an angle through his blinds, he found himself watching the floor, carefully making sure every shadow near him had a clear source so far. They all have, but he can't shake the memory of that one morning, when a shadow existed that didn't belong to anything at all, and the part that stays with him most is simple. It moved only when he moved. We were only cutting through the cemetery because the roadwork blocked the street. It was late, colder than it should have been, and the fog kept settling in patches like someone exhaling behind us. The others were joking about finishing homework, kicking leaves. Not really paying attention to where we were walking, there was a big marble tomb near the center path. The kind with a smooth face and an old family name worn almost flat. We stopped to check the map on my phone. The battery was low, the screen dimming like it didn't want to stay on. Something said my name. It wasn't loud. It sounded close, like someone standing behind me, but not wanting to be noticed. I turned fast, expecting one of my friends, but they were all still on the other side of the tomb. Then another person in our group froze. Did someone say my name? Before anyone moved, we heard all of our names, quiet, patient. Sliding through the marble surface like the stone wasn't there at all, we stepped back together. No one touched the tomb. No one talked. The fog gathered around the base of it in a tight ring, like it was waiting. No more whispers. But the feeling followed us down the path long after we left. We never used that. Shortcut now. 2. The one lamp that stays on, there's an old lamppost at the far end of the cemetery. The kind with a yellow bulb that never seems fully bright. I used to pass it every morning on my run before school. Sometimes it flickered, sometimes it buzzed, but it always stayed on. Even during power outages. One morning, I stopped to tie my shoe under it. The ground was damp, and the air still felt like night. When I stood up, the lamp turned off. Just a soft click, then nothing. I stepped away. 2 steps. 3. The lamp turned on again. I stepped forward. It turned off. I stepped back. It turned on. I thought it was motion sensing, so I tried moving around in different directions. It didn't react to movement, only distance. Exactly the distance between me and the post when I had stepped beneath it. The next morning, I didn't stop running. I didn't even look at it. The light was already on, waiting. 3. The path that isn't there in daylight. My cousin and I were exploring the older half of the cemetery, just walking, not messing with anything. There was a stone path leading between 2 rows of small markers. It wasn't paved, just flat stones sunk into the dirt. We followed it for a minute until it reached a low iron gate that wasn't attached to a wall or fence. It stood alone, rusted and slightly bent. The weird part was that the path continued beyond the gate, but looked cleaner. Like someone swept it recently. We didn't go through it. We just looked. The wind didn't move the grass in that direction, even though everything else was shifting. The next afternoon, when we went to show our uncle, the stone path wasn't there. The markers were. The trees were. The ground looked undisturbed, like no one had stepped there in years. The iron gate was lying on its side in the weeds. My cousin said he remembered. Stones under his feet. I said I did too, but neither of us remembers how we got off the path for the names that don't match. There's a small fenced section of the cemetery with very old marker-themed stones, chipping edges. My sister and I walked through it while waiting for our mom to pick us up from an event. Nearby, one of the markers had a name that looked familiar. Same last name as our neighbor. Same birth year. It caught my attention, so I pointed it out. My sister read it and said, "That's not what it says." She read a different name. We swapped places. She pointed. I read again. It was the first name I saw, clear as anything. She insisted her version was right. We both leaned in at the same time. The stone was blank. Just blank. No carving. No worn letters. Nothing. Mom honked from the parking lot. We walked away fast without talking. We didn't check again the next time we passed the cemetery. Neither of us wanted to see if it was still blank. 5. The footsteps on the gravel road behind the cemetery. There's a gravel service road used by groundskeepers. When I volunteered for a cleanup event, I was one of the last people walking back to the main entrance. The road was quiet except for the crunch of the gravel under my boots. Then there was another crunch. Behind me, same rhythm. Same speed. I looked back. No one. I walked again. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Then the other footsteps caught up a little, just slightly faster than mine. I stepped onto the grass. The sound stopped. I stepped back onto the gravel. One delayed crunch followed, like something taking a moment to react. I walked the rest of the way without stopping. When I reached the pavement, the sound ended completely, like the gravel only held one set of imprints at a time. Next year, I volunteered again. But I didn't take the service road. 6. The bench that warms up. There's an old stone bench near the largest oak tree. I walk past it almost every week on the way home. The stone is always cold. Even in summer, one evening I stopped for a minute to rest. When I sat down, the bench felt warm, like someone had just been sitting there a few seconds earlier. I checked both sides of the tree, thinking someone moved away when I arrived, but there was no one. No footprints in the soft dirt. No shoe marks, nothing. I stood up. The bench cooled instantly, like someone had pulled heat out of it. I don't sit there anymore. 7. The fresh flowers with no stems there. As a row of graves from the 1940s near the front. Someone always leaves flowers, they're different kinds every week. Roses, lilies, carnations. But the strange part is that none of them ever have stems. Just the heads of the flowers arranged in a neat circle. One afternoon, my cousin and I checked again. New flowers. No stems. No petals scattered. No cuts. Cleanly detached. We told the groundskeeper. He just said, "I don't touch those." He didn't explain. He didn't look at the graves. He walked away quickly. The next week, the circle was bigger. 8. The gate that clicks without moving. There's a small iron gate on the south side of the cemetery. It's old and rusted, and it barely moves when you push it. The hinges groan so loud you can hear them from the main path. But late one evening, while my friend and I were passing by, we heard a clean metal click. The sound of a latch being opened. Then another click, like it was being closed again. We watched the gate. It didn't move, not even a vibration. A minute later, the two clicks repeated. Open, close, but the gate stayed still. We walked away fast. The clicking continued behind us, steady, almost patient. 9. The mausoleum that isn't dark there. SA mausoleum near the west entrance with a small stained glass window. During the day, you can't see inside, it's too dim. At night, it should be completely dark. One evening, walking home from practice, I saw a soft glow inside. Not bright, just enough to tint the stained glass from within. I stepped closer, thinking there might be a candle or a phone light. When I got within a few feet, the glow faded. It didn't turn off. It faded slowly, like a dimmer being turned down. I backed away. When I reached the path, the glow returned, same soft brightness as before, steady as a lamp someone forgot. I don't walk that side anymore. 10. The grave. That changes shape in the fog. There's a section near the back where the fog gathers even on clear nights. One evening, I was walking through with a friend, trying to cut time. The fog was low, covering only the bases of the stones. We passed a grave shaped like a rectangle. A few minutes later, looping around, we saw the same grave again, but now it looked rounded, like a different marker entirely. We weren't lost. The tree beside it was the same. The bench across from it was the same. But the grave shape wasn't. We waited, watching the fog thin out. When it cleared, the grave looked normal, again rectangular, hard-edged, like it never changed. We didn't talk for the rest of the walk. 11. The stone, the face's youth. There's a tall marker, shaped like an obelisk, near the middle of the grounds. It's old, chipped, and leans slightly to one side. I used to walk past it on my way to the bus stop every morning. One morning, I noticed the tilt looked different, straighter. I thought maybe the grounds crew had fixed it. The next day, it leaned a little the other way. By the end of the week, I realized the tilt always pointed in the direction I approached from, like the stone was turning slowly over time, not rotating fully, just changing its lean enough to look different depending on the angle. I walk a different route now. I don't want to check if it still adjusts. 12. The name that appears on the fog on colder nights. Fog rolls across the east side of the cemetery in thin sheets. My friends and I once walked past it on the way home from the store. When the fog drifted, something like handwriting appeared on it, faint. Quick strokes, as if traced by cold air. It wasn't a whole message, just a single name. My friend said it looked like mine. I said it looked like his. When we looked again, it changed entirely, shifting like breath across a window. A few seconds later, the fog thinned and the letters vanished. We walked home quickly and didn't talk about it again. 13. The short path. That takes too long. There's a paved walkway that cuts between two big oak trees and leads straight out to the sidewalk. It's maybe 30 steps long. I've measured it before. Last month, walking alone in the early evening, I went down that path like usual. But halfway through, it felt longer. The trees looked farther apart than they should have been. When I reached the end, my phone said 8 minutes had passed. It should have been 30 seconds. The next day, I tried again. Normal, perfect length, nothing strange. But I don't use that path anymore when the sun is low. 14. The lantern that marks the wrong spot during the holidays. People sometimes hang little lanterns or lights on certain graves. There's one lantern that showed up by itself, simple metal frame, warm light inside. No name on it. It appeared next to a grave that didn't have decorations before. One night I walked by and saw the lantern placed on a completely different grave, a few rows over. I thought maybe the groundskeeper moved it. The next week it moved again. Another grave. Then another. Always glowing, always neat, never dusty or dim. One evening I saw the lantern sitting in the middle of the walkway, not on any grave at all. Just centered perfectly on the path like it was marking a spot. No one could see. It wasn't there the next morning. 15. The final quiet zone near the very back of the cemetery. There's an area that always feels windless, even when the rest of the grounds have leaves blowing. This corner stays still. I walked through it once during a school project on local history. As soon as I stepped into the space, the sounds of the road, the birds, even my own footsteps softened. Not gone, just muted, like someone turned the volume down. I only stayed a moment. Something about the silence felt too complete. When I stepped out of the zone, everything returned to normal instantly. The breeze, the noise, the crunch of gravel. I never went back there. It didn't feel wrong exactly, just too aware of anyone entering. My name is Daniel Roca. I'm from East Orosi, California, and I work as a grounds maintenance tech. I woke up that morning at 6 with the same stiff hands I always get when the cold settles in the valley. I heated yesterday's coffee on the stove because the microwave's been sparking again and the landlord won't call back. I put on the green work shirt with my name stitched wrong and clocked in at 7:02. At the cemetery office, like I always do on the days when the weekend crew doesn't show. I remember the exact sound of the punch clock because it never lines up with how my phone tells time. It always feels 2 minutes slow. I didn't think anything of that. I never do. I just grabbed the ring of keys from the hook, the old cart from the shed, and logged my route for the north section where the older stones tilt if you lean too hard on them. I remember thinking the air felt tight even though it was barely morning and we still had the valley smog sitting low between the rows of stones. I was alone for that shift. It was supposed to be a single 8-hour day. I checked sprinklers first, like always. One head was leaking near the east fence. Not much, just enough for dew to look thicker around it. I bent to tighten the fitting and noticed the first thing that didn't make sense. The tools I'd left on the cart behind me weren't on the cart anymore. They were lined up on the ground, perfectly straight. Wrench, pry bar, small rake, gloves. I stood there thinking maybe I put them down without thinking. I do that sometimes, but the gloves were folded. I never fold my gloves. I swear to God that made the back of my neck go tight. I picked everything up, put it back, and tried not to think about it. I kept telling myself it was too early, and I just needed to get through one shift. Around 9, the fog from the orchards on the other side of the road started pushing in. I couldn't see the far fence anymore. The cart engine sputtered like it always does when the air gets too cold. So I decided to work the lower rows closer to the maintenance shed. I kept hearing something like metal tapping, soft and spaced out. I thought it was from inside the shed because the roof's loose. When I went to check, the lock on the shed door was still snapped shut. I pulled it just to make sure. It didn't budge. When I stepped back, the tapping stopped. It was quiet enough that I could hear the wet gravel under my boots. I don't know why I whispered hello like someone was inside. I think it was just habit. I kept moving. I trimmed a few bushes, logged the maintenance numbers on my sheet, and tried to shake this feeling that something was leaning close every time I turned my back. Nothing dramatic. Just that feeling you get when someone stands too near you in line. I told myself it was because I hadn't slept much. I'd been on call for weeks, and sometimes I don't get solid nights. Man. Around 10, I walked back to the cart, and all my tools were gone again. Not stolen. Not scattered. They were inside the locked shed. I saw them through the dusty window, lined up on the workbench like someone was about to clock in and start sharpening them. The shed was still locked. The lock was still straight. There's only one copy of that key, and it was on my belt loop. I checked every ring, every pocket, every place I might have dropped something. The key was right there. I kept holding it like it would explain something. I opened the shed. Everything inside was still warm, like someone had been moving around. And all my tools were on the table in a different order than I ever placed them. The gloves were at the far end. The rake was angled toward the door like someone had been about to pick it up. I put them back in the cart and shut the shed. I locked it again. This time, I said it out loud. Locked, just to hear my own voice. The fog kept getting thicker. I thought maybe I should call the office, but my phone screen had this faint smear across it, like a thumbprint from the inside. I wiped it. It stayed. I didn't want to think about that either. So I kept working. Around lunch, I sat behind the old cypress tree near the west gate. That gate has been sealed since before I got hired. Welded shut. Everyone knows it. The cemetery map doesn't even list it as usable. I was eating my sandwich, and I heard something metal again, not tapping this time, but shifting weight, like a chain stretching. I stood up and walked toward the gate because sometimes branches fall and hit the bars. But when I got close, the air felt different, warmer, like someone had opened a dryer vent near me. The fog around the gate was thinner than the rest. I could see the bars clearly. They were open, not wide, just enough for a person to step through. The weld line was clean. No break, nothing bent. They were just open. I stepped back so fast, I dropped my lunch. I kept telling myself maybe I hadn't looked at it right. Maybe the fog played tricks. Maybe the gate had always looked like that and I didn't notice. But the records say it's sealed. The supervisor said it's sealed. The map says it's sealed. I walked around to the maintenance office again because I wanted to check the records myself. But when I got to the cart, my keys were gone. All of them. Not the shed key. Not the padlock keys. The entire ring. The clip was still on my belt. Just empty. I started searching the ground. The cart, the tree roots, the sprinkler box near the wall. I found the keys 20 minutes later on the far side of the cemetery near the north fence. They were hanging from a hook that's only used for holiday lights. No one uses that hook except in December. It wasn't December. I didn't put them there. And the gate behind me shifted open another inch when I turned around. It made a sound like something settling. I didn't want to go near it again. I don't know how long I stood there thinking about what I was supposed to do. The fog kept pulling back from that one spot even though the rest of the grounds were swallowed in it. I heard something behind me. Light footsteps on dry leaves. I spun around and nobody was there. But the leaves showed marks like someone had just walked through. Straight lines, heel marks, clear enough that I could see the pattern. They weren't mine. I tried to get the cart started, but the engine wouldn't turn over. I kept trying until the battery light blinked out. When I looked up, the tools in the back weren't in the back anymore. They were on the ground beside me, lined up the same way as before. Gloves folded. Rake angled. Wrench in the middle like a spine. I bent to pick them up, and something in the air shifted again, like someone was standing right over me. The cart seat creaked on its own. Not loud, not sharp. Just enough that I stood up fast because I knew it wasn't the wind. The wind couldn't get through the fog like that. I walked away from the cart and toward the office. I didn't look at the west gate. I knew it was open. I didn't need to see it. I could feel the air pulling from that direction, warm and steady. I made it halfway to the office before I realized the rows of graves around me weren't where they were that morning, just slightly different angles. Some leaned more, some stood straighter. One that used to be under the oak was a few feet closer to the path. Nothing huge, nothing obvious, just wrong enough that I felt my stomach tighten. And the keys on my belt were gone again. I didn't even hear them fall. They were just missing. I don't remember how I finished that shift. I know I signed out at 3:14. I know my timesheet is still in the office. I know the supervisor called me later asking why I left the tools in the shed in the wrong order, even though I swear I didn't go back in there. I don't remember going home. I don't remember locking my door. I only remember looking at my phone and seeing the same faint smear that wouldn't wipe away. I haven't gone back. I don't walk near that part of town anymore. I don't drive past the orchards when the fog is low. Every morning, my toolbox at home is arranged differently than I left it. Nothing missing, nothing added. Just moved, straightened, folded, and once. The smallest wrench was on the windowsill facing west, like it was waiting for something. I keep telling myself I escaped, but I don't think I did. Not really. I think part of that day is still moving around when I'm not looking. And every night, around the same time, I hear the soft metal shift of a gate that should be sealed.